What exactly are you implying, Myde? Majek asked, his voice sharp. Perhaps you should focus on your own students and stop sticking your watery nose where it doesn't belong. This is a witch hunt, he shouted. These students are lying to ruin my career.
Well, well. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, you need to subscribe.
Mayowa could barely sleep that night. The pressure of her decision weighed heavily on her chest, but she had resolved not to give in to Mr. Majek's demands. She lay awake in the darkness, praying for strength, for guidance, for some form of deliverance from the nightmare she was living. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through her window, a sense of calm washed over her. It wasn't the calm of knowing what to do next, but the calm of surrendering her fears to God. She decided that no matter the cost, she would stand her ground. The week passed in a haze of anxiety and dread. Mayowa continued attending her classes, but her mind was consumed by her looming battle with Mr. Majek. On Friday, as the deadline he had given her approached, she decided to go to his office not to submit, but to make her position clear. That evening, with her notebook in hand, she walked toward the faculty building. Her steps were slow, deliberate, as though every inch forward carried the weight of her resolve. She rehearsed her words in her mind. "Sir, I will not compromise my integrity for your approval. If I fail, I fail." As she neared his office, a strange sensation swept over her. The hallway, usually bustling with students and staff, was eerily silent. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly, casting long shadows on the walls. Her heart pounded in her chest as she knocked on his door. "Come in," his voice called, low and sharp. Mayowa stepped inside, her resolve stealing as she faced him. He sat behind his desk, his expression smug, his eyes cold and calculating. "Ah, Mayowa," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I was wondering if you'd show up." She took a deep breath. "Sir, I am here to make something clear. I will not compromise my values for your approval. I have worked hard in your class, and I deserve to be graded fairly." His smirk widened. "And if you don't, what then? You know the consequences." Mayowa met his gaze, her voice unwavering. "If I fail, I fail. But I won't give you what you want." Something in his eyes shifted, surprise, perhaps, or irritation. He stood abruptly, walking around his desk to stand mere inches from her. "You are a fool," he hissed. "Do you think your righteousness will save you here? I've destroyed girls stronger than you. Ask about me. Either you dance to my tune or you leave this department for good. Let's see how far your gra can take you. The wahala you are looking for, I will ensure you get it in bundles." His words cut deep, but Mayowa refused to back down. She turned and left his office, her heart pounding but her spirit intact. That night, Mayowa broke down in her room. The weight of everything she had endured crashed over her, and she cried harder than she ever had before. Between sobs, she whispered a desperate prayer. "God, if you are truly just, then let your judgment fall on him. Don't let him continue to destroy lives." She felt something shift in the room, a strange, unexplainable energy. It wasn't fear or anger, but something deeper, something almost sacred. It was as if the words she had spoken carried a power beyond her understanding. Unbeknownst to Mayowa, her prayer marked the beginning of the end for Mr. Majek. The next morning, he woke up feeling unwell. His head throbbed, and his body ached as though he had been beaten in his sleep. Dismissing it as stress, he continued with his day, but his discomfort only grew. By the evening, he was racked with fever and chills. In the days that followed, his condition worsened. His once commanding voice became hoarse, his confident stride faltered, and his sharp mind seemed to cloud. He dismissed the symptoms, convinced it was a temporary illness, but deep down, an unease began to stir within him. As if his failing health weren't enough, by the end of the month, Mr. Majek was a shadow of his former self. The man who had once terrorized students with his power and influence now found himself at the mercy of forces he could not control. Mayowa, unaware of the curse taking root in Mr. Majek's life, focused on rebuilding her own. Her grades continued to suffer, but she refused to let them break her. With the support of her friends and the strength of her faith, she began to find hope again. She didn't know it yet, but her prayer had set the stage for a reckoning that would change both their lives forever. Far from Ocean View University, in the bustling city of Abuja, Adaora had tried to rebuild her life after her traumatic encounter with Mr. Majek. She had graduated and moved away, leaving behind the nightmares of her final year. But while her body had left the university, her mind remained tethered to the humiliation and pain she had endured. She never spoke about it, burying the memories deep, hoping time would erase the scars. One evening, as she was scrolling through her phone after work, a message from an old classmate popped up. The message was short, but it sent a chill through her. "Adaora, do you remember Mr. Majek? Another girl is going through what you did. Her name is Mayowa. We need to help her." Adaora froze, her mind racing. Images of her time at Ocean View flashed before her, her meticulously written project rejected, the veiled threats, the degrading encounter in his office. She thought she had moved on, but the memories were as sharp as ever. For a moment, she wanted to ignore the message. She had spent years trying to forget, and the idea of revisiting that dark chapter of her life terrified her. But then she thought about Mayowa, a girl she had never met, trapped in the same nightmare. How could she stay silent? The next day, Adaora sat in her living room, staring at the blank screen of her laptop. She opened a new document and began to type. Slowly at first, but then the words began to pour out of everything she had endured at the hands of Mr. Majek. She wrote about his threats, the manipulation, the powerlessness she had felt. It was painful, but also cathartic. When she finished, she reached out to her former classmate, who connected her to Mayowa. A phone call was arranged, and Adora's hands shook as she dialed the number. She didn't know what she would say, but she knew she had to speak. "Hello?" Mayowa's voice came through, hesitant and quiet. "Hi, Mayowa. My name is Adaora. I heard about what you are going through with Mr. Majek. I just wanted to say that you are not alone." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Mayowa whispered, "You went through it too." "Yes," Adaora replied, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I know exactly what you are going through, and I want to help." Over the next hour, Adaora shared her story. She told Mayowa about the choices she had been forced to make, the shame she had carried, and the regret that had haunted her ever since. "I kept quiet because I was scared," she admitted. "But I regret that silence every day. If I had spoken out, maybe others wouldn't have suffered." Mayowa listened intently, tears streaming down her face. She had never felt so seen, so understood. "I don't know if I can fight him," she said. "He's too powerful." "No one can fight him alone," Adaora said firmly. "But together we can. There are more of us, Mayowa, more girls like us who've been hurt by him. If we come together, we can make sure he never does this to anyone else." For the first time, Mayowa felt a glimmer of hope. Adaora's courage was contagious, and the idea of standing with others gave her strength she didn't know she had. That night, Adaora began reaching out to other former students. Those she suspected had also suffered under Mr. Majek. She knew it would take time, but she was determined to build a case against him. Meanwhile, Mayowa continued documenting her experiences, now more determined than ever to see justice served. Little did they know, their actions were setting the stage for a reckoning that would shake Ocean View University to its core. And for Mr. Majek, the walls were beginning to close in. For years, Mr. Majek had built a reputation as untouchable. His influence within Ocean View University and the broader academic community was reinforced by carefully cultivated alliances. But even the most formidable fortresses can crumble, and the cracks in his armor were beginning to show. It started subtly. After Mayowa's defiance, his health began to deteriorate. At first, it was a persistent headache that no amount of medication could cure. Then came the sleepless nights, filled with nightmares that left him drenched in sweat. He dreamed of the faces of the girls he had victimized, Adaora, Fatimah, and now Mayowa standing in a circle, staring at him silently with unblinking eyes. He would wake up gasping for air, the weight of their gazes pressing on his chest like a stone. Just stress, he muttered to himself one morning, staring at his haggard reflection in the bathroom mirror. The first public crack appeared during a routine faculty meeting. It was meant to be a straightforward discussion about departmental funding, but one of the younger lecturers, Dr. Myde, raised an unexpected issue. "I've been hearing disturbing complaints from students," Dr. Myde began cautiously, specifically about grade manipulation and inappropriate behavior from certain lecturers. The room fell silent. Everyone knew who he was referring to, but no one dared to speak his name. All eyes turned to Mr. Majek, who sat at the far end of the table, his face unreadable. "What exactly are you implying, Myde?" Majek asked, his voice sharp. "I am not implying anything," Dr. Myde replied, his tone steady. "But if these allegations are true, they could tarnish the reputation of our department and the university as a whole." Majek leaned forward, his gaze cold and calculating. "Perhaps you should focus on your own students instead of peddling baseless rumors." The tension in the room was palpable, but Dr. Myde didn't back down. "I think the administration should investigate. If T here is nothing to hide, then T here is no harm in transparency." Majek didn't respond. He simply leaned back in his chair, his smirk more forced than usual. But as the meeting continued, he couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were beginning to close in. Outside the faculty, the whispers were growing louder. Students began sharing their stories anonymously on social media, emboldened by Mayowa's quiet resolve and Adora's efforts to gather testimonials. A hashtag number, #ExposeMajek, started trending among Ocean View University students, sparking a wave of conversations that the administration could no longer ignore. Even among his colleagues, the mood was shifting. Majek had always relied on their silence to protect him, but now some of them were beginning to question their complicity. "If even half of what the students are saying is true, he's a liability," one lecturer whispered to another in the staff lounge. Meanwhile, Majek's personal life was falling apart. His wife, Stella, had grown tired of his erratic behavior. The constant fevers, the late nights pacing the living room, the muttered complaints about ungrateful students, it was all too much. "What is wrong with you, Majek?" Stella asked one evening as he sat at the dining table, staring blankly at his untouched plate of food. "Nothing," he snapped. "Just work stress." "Work stress doesn't explain why you've been acting like this," she countered. "Or why did the university call to ask about complaints from students?" Majek froze. "What complaints?" Stella folded her arms. "They didn't give details, but they said T here has been an increase in reports about your conduct." "Majek, what have you done?" His temper flared. "Stay out of my business, Stella." But her words lingered long after she left the room. For the first time, Majek felt the weight of his sins pressing down on him. The fear that he had always instilled in others was now his own constant companion. The following week, Majek's carefully constructed world took another hit. A student named Chuka, emboldened by the online conversations, filed an official complaint against him for extortion. Though Chuka was a male student and his allegations didn't involve sexual misconduct, the complaint was enough to trigger an administrative review of Majek's grading practices. When Majek received the notification, he felt the first real pang of panic. The cracks were no longer hidden, they were spreading rapidly. And he knew that if he didn't act soon, everything he had built would come crashing down. But as he prepared to fight back, he couldn't escape the growing sense that something far greater than student complaints or administrative reviews was at play. His nightmares grew more vivid, the faces of his victims more accusing. And deep down, he began to wonder if the darkness closing in on him wasn't just the result of human efforts, but something far more divine. The weight of the growing accusations, his failing health, and the whispers in the university halls was already crushing Mr. Majek. But the worst was yet to come. His carefully controlled life was about to spiral even further out of control. It was a rainy evening in Lagos, the kind of rain that made driving treacherous. Majek's eldest son, Dele, had just finished a late-night tutoring session and was on his way home. Dele was everything Majek prided himself on, a bright, ambitious young man destined for greatness, his father's pride and joy. The roads were slick, the street lights dimmed by the downpour. Dele, distracted by his phone buzzing with messages from friends, barely noticed the car speeding toward him until it was too late. The impact was deafening. His car spun out of control before slamming into a utility pole. Passers-by rushed to the scene, dragging his unconscious body from the wreckage. The call came just past midnight. Majek was sitting alone in his living room, nursing a headache that had become his constant companion. When the phone rang, he answered irritably, expecting yet another call about university matters. Instead, the panicked voice on the other end sent a chill down his spine. "Mr. Majek Odumi, this is Dr. Femi from General Hospital. Your son Dale has been in a serious car accident. He's in critical condition." Majek froze, his breath caught in his throat. What? What happened?" he stammered. "Please come to the hospital immediately," the doctor said before the line went dead. The hospital waiting room was a blur of fluorescent lights and murmured conversations. Majek sat with his wife Stella, who was in tears, gripping a rosary in her trembling hands. Their younger children sat nearby, their faces pale with fear. After what felt like an eternity, the doctor emerged, his expression grim. "Dele has sustained severe spinal injuries. We managed to stabilize him, but I am afraid the damage is irreversible. He's paralyzed from the waist down." Stella let out a wail, collapsing into her husband's arms. Majek, however, sat frozen, his mind racing. Paralyzed? How could this happen to his son, his pride, his legacy? The news of Dele's condition sent shockwaves through Majek's already fragile psyche. At home, he grew even more withdrawn, his temper flaring unpredictably. Stella tried to console him, but his guilt and fear consumed him. "It's not your fault," she whispered one night as he sat on the edge of their bed, staring into the darkness. But Majek wasn't so sure. The nightmares that had plagued him for weeks intensified. In his dreams, he saw Fatimah standing beside Dele's hospital bed, her face a mask of sorrow and accusation. "You took everything from me," she said in the dream, her voice echoing. "Now it's your turn." He woke up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding. The words felt too real, too pointed to dismiss as a mere nightmare. As the days passed, more misfortunes piled onto the Majekodumi family. Financial strain from Dele's medical bills forced them to sell off valuable assets, including his wife's car. At the university, the administrative review into his grading practices was gaining traction. Several students, emboldened by Chuka's complaint, came forward with allegations of extortion and harassment. The walls were closing in, and Majek knew it. But even with his life unraveling, Majek refused to admit defeat. Instead, he grew angrier, blaming everyone but himself for his misfortunes. He lashed out at his colleagues, his family, and even his students, hoping to reassert control. but deep down he knew the truth. He was losing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. One evening, as Majek sat alone in the small living room of their new apartment, Stella approached him cautiously. "Majek," she began softly, "I think you need to pray." He scoffed. "Pray for what?" "For forgiveness," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know what you've done, but something is wrong. I feel it." Her words stung, but Majek brushed them off. Yet as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, her words echoed in his mind. He thought about Mayowa, about her defiance, and about the quiet strength she had shown even as he tried to break her. He thought about Tola, the student he just clapped off recently, probably because she was a witch. For the first time, the possibility he had been avoiding entered his mind. What if this is punishment? What if I've brought this on myself? The thought chilled him to the bone. Life, once a tapestry of wealth and power for Mr. Majek, was unraveling thread by thread. The accident that left his son Deal paralyzed had dealt a blow to his pride, but the storm was far from over. It wasn't just his family that was falling apart. His professional life was crumbling beneath him, and with each passing day, he felt more trapped. It began with the foreclosure notice. Majek had always prided himself on providing his family with a luxurious home in one of Lagos's most affluent neighborhoods. The sprawling compound, the lush garden, the ornate furniture, it was all a testament to his success. But with the mounting medical bills for Dele's care and his inability to pay off debts, the bank repossessed the property. The day they moved out, Stella sat on the edge of the bed, tears streaming down her face as she packed what little they could take. The children, confused and frightened, clung to her silently. Majek stood by the window, his face set in a grim mask, refusing to show his anguish. "This is temporary," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "We'll bounce back." But even as he spoke, he knew the words were hollow. Their new home was a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of the city. Gone were the spacious rooms and luxurious amenities. Now, they shared a tiny living space where every argument echoed off the walls. Stella tried to make the best of it, but the tension between her and Majek grew with each passing day. "You promised me a life of stability," she snapped one evening as they argued over finances. "Now look at us. What kind of life is this for our children?" Majek slammed his fist on the table. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I asked for this to happen?" "Then tell me what's going on," she shouted, her voice trembling. "Why does it feel like we're cursed? What did you do, Majek?" Her words hit harder than she realized. Majek stormed out of the apartment, but the question lingered in his mind. "What did you do?" "Please, we really need you to subscribe. We need your support so this channel can grow." "Thank you. Now back to the video." At the university, the administrative review had taken a sharp turn against him. Chuka's complaint was just the beginning. Other students began coming forward, detailing years of abuse and exploitation. Some accused him of demanding bribes, others of failing them unfairly, and still others of inappropriate behavior. The sheer number of allegations made it impossible for the administration to ignore. Majek was summoned to a formal hearing. As he sat in the sterile conference room, facing a panel of senior faculty members, he felt the first real pangs of fear. "Mr. Majekadumi," the dean began, her tone icy, "we've received numerous complaints about your conduct. The evidence against you is extensive, and the university's reputation is at stake." "These are baseless accusations," Majek replied, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Students are just upset because I hold them to high standards." The dean's expression didn't waver. High standards don't explain the testimonies of dozens of students, nor the irregularities in your grading system. He had no answer. For the first time in his career, he felt the ground beneath him begin to shift. At home, things weren't much better. Dele's condition required constant care, and the strain on the family was evident. Stella, who had once been his unwavering supporter, was growing distant. The younger children tiptoed around him, sensing his volatility. Even his colleagues at the university had begun to avoid him, unwilling to be associated with a man under investigation. One evening, as he sat alone in the living room, he felt the full weight of his losses pressing down on him. The house, his career, his family's respect was all slipping away. For a man who had thrived on control, the loss of power was unbearable. But it was the nightmares that haunted him most. Night after night, he dreamed of girls covering their faces, standing in the ruins of his life, their eyes burning with a quiet intensity. "You took everything from me," she whispered, her voice echoing. "Now you'll know what it feels like." He woke up drenched in sweat, the echoes of her words reverberating in his mind. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was being punished not just by the university or his family, but by something far greater. And for the first time, Majek began to wonder if there was any way to undo what he had done. The campus of Ocean View University had grown restless. The whispered rumors about Mr. Majek were no longer confined to late-night hostile conversations or vague social media posts. Thanks to Adaora's efforts and Mayowa's quiet courage, students were beginning to speak out. The storm that had been brewing for years was finally reaching its peak. In a small cafe near campus, Adaora sat across from Fatimah and Mayowa. The women were nervous, but their shared history bound them in a way few others could understand. "We have enough testimonies now," Adaora said, her voice firm. 7 former students, including you and me, and 2 current students who are willing to remain anonymous. It's time to take this to the administration." Fatimah nodded, but her expression was clouded with doubt. "Do you think they'll actually listen? He's been untouchable for so long." Adaora's jaw tightened. "They'll have no choice. Here is too much evidence now, and with the social media campaign gaining traction, the university won't want to risk its reputation." Mayowa agreed. The number expose Majek movement had grown beyond their expectations. Students were sharing their stories online, and alumni were joining the conversation, expressing their support for the victims. The hashtag had even caught the attention of a local journalist. "I am scared," Mayowa admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if he finds out? What if he comes after us?" Adaora reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "He's already losing control. He's sick, his family is struggling, and the administration is investigating him. He's weaker than he's ever been. This is the time to strike." Meanwhile, on campus, Mayowa's name had become a symbol of quiet defiance. Her refusal to be silenced gave others the courage to stand up as well. One of those students was a young woman named Tenny, a second-year student who had once been too afraid to confront Majek. Tenny had been one of the anonymous voices behind the number Expose Majek hashtag, and her posts had resonated with countless others. "I failed his course 3 times, Tenny wrote in one of her posts. "Not because I didn't work hard, but because I refused to meet his conditions. It nearly broke me, but I won't stay silent anymore. We deserve better." In the administrative offices, the pressure was mounting. The dean of the social sciences faculty, Dr. Obafemi, was inundated with emails, phone calls, and formal complaints from students and alumni. The evidence against Majek was overwhelming. Testimonies, screenshots of threatening messages, and even voice recordings secretly taken by brave students. Dr. Obafemi convened an emergency meeting with the university's disciplinary board. "We cannot ignore this any longer," she told the panel. "Majek has been a liability for years, and now we have the proof. If we don't act, The backlash will be catastrophic. As the investigation gained momentum, Majek's paranoia grew. He had heard about the social media campaign and knew the administration was looking into his conduct. His health continued to deteriorate, and he had become a recluse, rarely leaving his home except for mandatory faculty meetings. One evening, as he sat alone in his living room, scrolling through the number Expose Majek hashtag, he came across a post that stopped him cold. It was a photo of a notebook page with detailed accounts of his harassment and threats written in neat handwriting. He recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Mayowa. The sight of her words filled him with a mix of anger and fear. "That girl," he muttered, his voice shaking. "She started all this." His mind raced, trying to think of a way to regain control. But for the first time in his life, he felt powerless. The voices of his victims were louder than his threats, and the world was finally listening. Mayowa knelt by her bed that night, praying for strength not just for herself, but for everyone who had been hurt by Majek. "God," she whispered, "let justice be done." The storm was no longer gathering. It had arrived, and for the first time in his life, Majek had nowhere to hide. The next morning, Ocean View University was abuzz with tension. The disciplinary board meeting to address the allegations against Mr. Majek had finally arrived. For weeks, the whispers about his misconduct had grown louder, fueled by the mounting evidence and the relentless momentum of the number Expose Majek movement. Today, the administration would have no choice but to confront the storm head-on. In the boardroom, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The panel consisted of senior faculty members, legal advisors, and student representatives. At the head of the table sat Dr. Obafemi, the dean of the social sciences faculty. Her normally composed demeanor showed cracks of stress as she flipped through the stack of documents in front of her student testimonies, screenshots, recordings, and more. Adaora, Mayowa, and Fatimah sat in the corner of the room, their presence quiet but powerful. Though they weren't required to attend, they had insisted on being there to ensure their voices were heard. Their testimonies were among the most damning pieces of evidence against Majek, and their courage had inspired others to come forward. "I hope this is worth it," Fatimah whispered to the ladies, her hands trembling. "It will be," Adaora replied firmly, though she too felt the weight of the moment. "It has to be." Outside, in the hallway, Majek paced back and forth, his face pale and drawn. His once commanding presence was now a shadow of its former self. His clothes hung loosely on his thinning frame, and dark circles underlined his bloodshot eyes. The past few months of stress, illness, and humiliation had taken their toll. When the board secretary called him into the room, Majek took a deep breath and stepped inside, his jaw clenched. The panel's eyes bore into him as he took his seat. He could feel their judgment, their disdain, and it sent a shiver down his spine. "Mr. Majek Odumi," Dr. Obafemi began, her voice calm but firm. "You are here today because of numerous allegations of misconduct, including sexual harassment, extortion, and abuse of power. We have collected substantial evidence, including testimonies from former and current students. You will be given the opportunity to respond to these allegations. Do you understand?" Majek nodded stiffly, his hands gripping the edges of the table. "Yes, I understand." The hearing began with the presentation of evidence. One by one, the testimonies were read aloud. They spoke of the same patterns, subtle threats, manipulated grades, and, for the female students, the ultimate ultimatum: comply with his advances or fail his course. Some of the testimonies were accompanied by voice recordings, chilling in their clarity. "If you want to pass, you'll have to make sacrifices," Majek's voice echoed in one recording. "You are a smart girl. You know what I mean." The room was silent as the words hung in the air, their weight undeniable. Adaora clenched her fists under the table, her anger bubbling to the surface. Fatimah's eyes filled with tears. but she held her head high. Majek shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "These recordings could be fabricated," he said, his voice defensive. "Anyone could imitate my voice." Dr. Obafemi raised an eyebrow. "And what about the grade inconsistencies? Several students have provided evidence showing clear manipulation of their scores." Majek faltered, his usual confidence failing him. I don't know. There could have been clerical errors." The panel's skepticism was palpable. The evidence was too damning, too consistent to dismiss. As the hearing continued, Majek's protests grew weaker, his excuses more desperate. Meanwhile, outside the boardroom, students gathered in quiet anticipation. The Number Expose Majek movement had galvanized the campus, and many felt this was a turning point, not just for the university, but for their generation. Among them was Tenny, whose anonymous posts had helped bring the allegations to light. "If they don't take action today," Tenny said to a friend, "then everything we've done will be for nothing." "They will," her friend replied. "They have to." Back in the boardroom, the final testimonies were presented. Among them was Fatimah's written account, submitted through Mayowa. As Dr. Obafemi read Mayowa's words aloud, the room fell silent. Her testimony was raw and emotional, describing not just the harassment, but the impact it had on her mental health and her decision to transfer university. "I refused to give in," Mayowa had written, "and he punished me for it. I lost my chance to graduate from Ocean View, but I refused to lose my voice. This is not just about me. It's about every student who has been hurt, silenced, or made to feel powerless. We deserve better." Majek's composure finally cracked. He slammed his fist on the table, his voice trembling with anger. "This is a witch hunt," he shouted. "These students are lying to ruin my career." "Enough, Mr. Majek Adumi," Dr. Obafemi said sharply. "The evidence speaks for itself." After hours of deliberation, the panel reached its decision. Majek was to be suspended indefinitely, pending further investigation by the university and law enforcement. He was escorted off campus that same day, his once proud stride reduced to a defeated shuffle. As he left the building, the students outside erupted into cheers. Tenny and her friends hugged each other, their faces alight with hope. Adaora, Mayowa, and Fatimah stepped out of the boardroom, their hearts heavy but relieved. "We did it," Adaora said quietly. Fatimah nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. "We finally did it." As they shared a passionate hug, the storm had passed, but the fight wasn't over. For Majek, the consequences of his actions were just beginning. And for Mayowa, Adaora, Fatimah, and the others, the journey toward healing and justice was far from finished. The trial began 3 weeks later, drawing significant attention from the media and the academic community. Mayowa, Adaora, Fatimah, and several other victims testified, recounting their experiences in painful detail. Each testimony painted a damning picture of Majek's abuse of power and the devastating impact it had on their lives. Mayowa's testimony was particularly powerful. She spoke with quiet strength, her voice steady as she described the harassment, the threats, and the night she had broken down and prayed for justice. "I forgave him," she said, her gaze fixed on the judge. "But forgiveness doesn't erase what he's done to other girls. It doesn't undo the harm he has caused. That's why we're here to make sure no one else suffers the way we did." Majek's defense team tried to discredit the victims, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the messages, the grade inconsistencies, they all told a story that couldn't be ignored. The trial lasted several weeks, and the verdict was unanimous. Majek was found guilty of multiple counts of sexual harassment, extortion, and abuse of power. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to his victims. When the verdict was announced, Mayowa felt a wave of emotions, relief, closure, and a deep sense of justice. Adaora and Fatimah embraced her, tears streaming down their faces. They had done it. They had fought back and won. In the weeks that followed, the women began to heal. Mayowa focused on her studies at Harmony University, finding new purpose in student advocacy. Adaora became an outspoken activist, working to raise awareness about harassment in academia. Fatimah returned to school, determined to reclaim the dreams Majek had tried to steal from her. Their story inspired others to speak out, sparking a movement that reached far beyond Ocean View University. Policies were implemented to protect students, and lecturers were held to higher standards of accountability. The legacy of their fight became a beacon of hope for future generations. One evening, as Fatimah sat in her dorm room reflecting on everything she had been through, she opened her journal and wrote. Justice was not easy, and it didn't come quickly. But it came, and with it we found peace, not because of revenge, but because we reclaimed our voices. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel to watch more videos like this.